Hi, I'm retired NYPD Detective Vic Ferrari, and welcome to NYPD Through the Looking Glass podcast, where you get unique insight into the New York City Police Department. Before we get started, I encourage you to check out my Amazon author page, where you'll find my series of behind-the-scenes NYPD books. They're $10 paperback or $2.99 ebook download, including NYPD Behind the Blue Wall of Silence. I'm excited about today's guest. She's a retired Las Vegas Metro Police Department sergeant who spent most of her career working undercover. Jennifer Benjamin is also the owner of Covert Blue, LLC, an undercover training school for law enforcement officers. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. Jennifer, please tell my listeners a little something about yourself.
So, my name is Jen Benjamins. I am 48 years old. I was born and raised in Las Vegas. I am a graduate of University of Nevada, Las Vegas. I have a criminal justice degree. Shortly after graduating, 3 months later, actually, I joined the police department and I spent 22 years there. And it was probably like the best decision I ever made in my life. Las Vegas. It's my hometown. I created this business after a few years of a little bit of a hiatus, and from the police department, I've just gotten like this resurgence to really serve other police officers and give what's all in my head with undercover operations because it's such a different and a special genre of policing. And so I was like, you know what, I really need to start training again and teaching because I'm only here on this planet for the amount of time to hold it in and not share it, not support other officers. I feel like that's now my new calling, my new endeavor in life, and trying to put a little bit of a legacy out there.
When you first started in law enforcement, you worked at a juvenile detention center.
Yeah, while I was at UNLV, I was part time at juvie, and part time is 39 hours and less. So they didn't have to pay me the big bucks. They didn't have to pay me any
Right.
kind of like, perks or anything. And it was funny because it was kind of a blessing because when I was there, I was able to interact with these kids and figure out, like their background. You'd see their parents come in for parent day, and you're like, oh, that's kind of explains a lot when that kid comes
Yeah.
in without, and then their parents, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it. This is why. I got to read some of their reports and I was like, wow, this is really interesting stuff. And I was still at UNLV, and thank God they didn't hire me full time. And I went through the probation academy because it was about March they were hiring, and I was just set to graduate of May of 2000. And I was like, I really want to be a probation officer and for juvenile offenders. I know. And then I was like, cool. Like, I'm going to graduate in May. By the time I start the probation academy in March, I'll be graduated by May. Like, they were like, no, you need to have that degree first. And I was like, I've been doing this job for a year and a half, which to be honest, I was doing the same job as the probation officers, checking the doors, checking on the kids. It was really like you were just a high priced babysitter of these kids just to make sure you're not mentoring them, you're not doing anything. But I was like, okay, so you guys don't want me. So I ended up testing for Metro and got in September of 2000. And they were like, oh, well, we want you to stay. And I'm like, no, you had your opportunity to have
Yeah.
me. I'm going to go play outside in the big boys world. So yeah, and then I just joined Metro. So when I got into the academy, one, I couldn't believe that they were paying us. They're like paying me to learn how to work, instead of like the university where I'm paying them to teach me, which still I don't think I use that degree, except for it sounds good that I have a bachelor's, but and then they're paying me to learn the job, and every 2 weeks I got a paycheck. I thought that was amazing. It was more money than I thought I had ever seen in my life, I guess. And then I just started the job, and it was just like amazing. Las Vegas Metro really, to me, is one of the greatest departments in this country.
How many members?
I believe there's now 4,000
Oh, wow. That's pretty big.
commissioned. And then you got all the civilian staff. And we run the jail as well. So we run the county jail. Those are Metro employees. And the city is actually run by city marshals, those who for the misdemeanor offenses that occur in the city limits. So I mean it's quite a big with endless possibilities. Like when I first got on, they still had dare. And so if you
Oh,
didn't want
yeah.
to be on the street, you can test for dare. You want to
Yeah.
go to horse patrol, you want to run a canine. I mean, there's so many things to do out here.
What was it? So you go through the academy, you go to a precinct, I guess, or a district. What is
Mhm.
it like way back when as a rookie cop?
Yeah, actually, it was 2001.
Oh, okay.
February 2nd, I think, was the date of 2001. So you go through the academy. The academy was about 22 weeks, 24 weeks, somewhere around there. And then you go to two different, at the time, you went to two different substations. And so I went to Northeast. Northeast is the rough area, predominantly Hispanic, lots of gangs there. There's not like, a high life living out there. It's pretty rough station to work. But I was glad. I was like, you might as well get me,
Right.
baptism by fire, right? Stick me in
Mhm.
the worst part. And it actually at the time, that station was right next to the academy. So I literally like moved over to the next building. And I remember when I sat in the briefing room and I was, you're nervous, you're getting judged on everything, whether it could be your penmanship, it could be if you know this code or that code. And I remember sitting in the back and I was going to get assigned an FTO, field training officer, and they're like, oh, you probably shouldn't sit right here. And I was in the back, not in the front, probably that they make them sit in the front now, but they're like, the last 2 weeks ago, an FTO shot his trainee right there, and no, she AD'd and like fucking shot her trainee. So I was like, great, like what am I getting into? I mean, I'm worried about the people on the outside. Now I'm worried about the people on the inside. But yeah, you go to at the time you went to two different stations, so your training was broken up into two. So you went to one station and then you transitioned almost like having like the next semester became another station. That's when I ended up in what at the time was Southwest Area Command. And that was more near Chinatown, near some more affluent areas of Las Vegas. So it was much different. And I think they do that, especially now, they do that on purpose where they give you like a residential kind of substation and then they put you in, you have to do a tourist corridor. So you have to be assigned to the strip or downtown. So you can get that experience of everything and you may end up wherever you end up, that's probably where you're going to stay for a minute until you can transfer.
As a I've been to Vegas twice, and I only know the Strip because there would be no reason for me to go to the suburbs. And
Yeah.
a lot of our listeners would be curious. I mean, were there a lot of calls at the casinos?
Yeah, there's calls all the time. Like we have an area command that is just strictly, I mean, it has a few of the exterior part of the strip, some of the hotels or the motels or some of the daily weeklies or whatever. But yeah, like there's a whole substation that has, I believe, I want to say at minimum 150 cops, if not a little more than that. And they strictly work the strip. And then you have downtown area command, which then downtown encompasses all the houses around downtown plus that Fremont Street.
I'm sure like the casinos hire retired cops and retired law enforcement to watch over the casinos. And I'm guessing when you guys get a call there for a casino cheat or some kind of scam in the casino, they've already got the guy in cuffs or detained. They've already got a report written up that's probably like a police report. And basically, it's kind of like a handoff.
Yeah, it's really nice because, like, especially the higher rank that you go, the more possibilities you have of being like the chief of or the head security director of one of these casinos. I mean, many of the casinos on the strip, if I can think of, I know at least five that are head of security of some casino because, yeah, there's a lot that goes to working for Metro and being in this town because you understand a lot of things. And one of the misconceptions that we have is like that there's a cop in every a uniform guy in every casino or outside of it or whatever, but still the strip is so big. It's 2 miles of like casinos, ding dongs hanging out on the sidewalks, doing crime there. I mean, if you followed the news anywhere, you could see that we've had shootings, we've had stabbings, we've had, I mean, you get prostitutes fighting each other, pimps fighting each other, gangsters, like, then you got the homeless people and you have, I mean, it's just like, it's not like anywhere else in the world, in my opinion, but, and everything and anything happens there. And they love to hire, the casinos love to hire retired cops, especially because it's so nice that they actually have these things called corporate investigations, and corporate investigators in the casinos are like the police of the casino. So they actually do investigations. So when you come from Metro, there's just this I don't want to say like expectation and maybe this assumption that you're going to be good in the civilian world. It's I teach this all the time because I teach psychological effects of undercover work, and I we talk a lot about the transition from the commission to a civilian world, and some people have a hard time cutting like
Yeah.
not flipping that switch, right? They still think they have that power, that control, that authority, and you go to the civilian world, it's customer service, like it's customer service based. So you get some guy yelling at you and whatever about his hotel room or whatever, even the hooker that stole all his money and his watch and whatever, and he's yelling at you about whatever, and you're like, sir, how can I make this better? And it's like, what?
Oh
and
man.
and I worked briefly at the Wynn Hotel, which I love the Wynn. I think it's one of the prettiest hotels, the nicest hotels, the cleanest. Their security personnel are a lot of Metro, especially the higher ups. They do a great job of like really putting together a good team, really educating them on how to police their own building, because that's really ultimately any business, even the Walmart, how to control your own business. You can tell people you don't want them there, you kick them out. Like, and the reports and the corporate investigators and those kind of stuff, they do have like their background and experience, which does help police their own property. You don't want the cops on your property where someone else is telling the police we need you on our property instead of the administration of the casino, right? Because gaming is a whole other issue and they do not want to screw with the gaming control
Right.
board. Problems on your property means you're not regulating or policing your own property. You're going to have problems with gaming control.
Every time you say gaming control, I think of that scene in Casino where Robert De Niro's trying to get his license back, and they're all voting him out, and he has a shit fit out the door, which really happened. So Las Vegas has every scam artist. It's kind of like 42nd Street in Manhattan. What a kind what was the kind of the scams that you saw tourists fall for?
Well, prostitution is probably the number one thing. They're everywhere. Why I lump it in with a scam is because the game is really rough out here. It's not really about like I'm walking down the street, I see a pretty girl as a guy. I assume or I have a conversation that leads to her saying that she's a prostitute, and then we go back to the hotel, we do the deed, I exchange the money, and she leaves. Like, that's great if it happened like that every time, but it does not. Like, you're drugging. We had a girl a couple of years ago who drugged like five guys, and then the last one died because he
Jesus.
overdosed, right? So, and I always used to think to myself, like, well, do I really want to have sex with at least one person a day, every day, working as a prostitute? Like, that's horrible, right? So some of these girls are like, hey, if I can drug him instead of F him and get all his shit and his money and his, watch and all this, it's a no-brainer for some of these girls. So that's like really the ultimate scam, besides pickpocketers and getting robbed in the wrong alley or the street or whatever. I mean, that stuff can happen too, but a lot of the convention center area command, they're really good about regulating anything that just pops up, like card stuff or even water cellars. I mean, they got water cellars up and down the strip, and you don't know if you're drinking water or you're drinking stuff
Oh
that came
god.
out of the fountain of Bellagio. You just never know, and they screw the cap back. I was like, I wouldn't drink that water if I were you because I don't really know where that came from. You don't know if it's like fresh or whatever, but it is. It's like, and then the game shifted even probably about 10 years ago. It's like pimps started doing introductions to the Johns with the prostitute and go, yeah, I'll walk up with you to your room. And they would walk these tricks up to the room just to make sure the girl got there on time, got there and like they were all satisfied and stuff. And then they would rob him. I had a guy who got his ass whooped, and because he brought a girl up with the pimp, which, he just thought, I guess he was the manager of her, and the dude got clocked, stole his stuff. They run. Now he's in the hospital with a broken orbital, and all this stuff. And it's like, when they say, what do they say? That what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? But what happens in Vegas usually goes to court 30 days later. Like, you're not, it's not like you're
Oh.
coming here to like, it's not Hangover, right? You're not trying to recreate Hangover and live this great life, but there's guys that do it. And constantly it's a guy who's married and just thought, okay, I'm in Vegas and I'm gonna,
Take
live
that
this.
chance.
Yeah, take the chance, right? To risk whatever if you're trying to get to, but or even drugs. Like you can get a ton of drugs on the street. It's very easy if you just ask the right questions with the right people. You're gonna be able to find it. We have hosts, and so we have a lot of nightclubs here and day clubs, but you'll have these hosts that are just they're like I don't want to say cockroaches because I'm sure there's great hosts out there, but they're just wanting to sell you this dream of this like beautiful time you're going to have in Vegas, right? And for the right host, if you just are like, hey, I want to go to a nightclub. Hey, can I get some party favors? Oh, hey, do you know any girls that would, the working girls? Those guys can hook up anything, man. They got girls on speed dial. They got find the dope and they can get you into a club for free.
Obviously, there's a lot of casino cheats, and I'm sure the casinos shut that down very quickly with the amount of cameras and surveillance. Do you have any funny casino cheating stories?
Um, I don't know. Like I said, gaming control board, they're the number one people with that. We actually didn't do a lot of the gaming or whatever. The only time I ever remember addressing one of those is we saw a guy pull money out of some other person's machine, and then the understanding is if I pull it out of your machine without you looking or whatever, and I go to the next machine and I put the money in, it's automatically my money. But there's like the surveillance in Las Vegas is insane. And then when Vegas Metro started doing a lot of the surveillance stuff, like we have, I don't know now at this point, it could be 400 cameras throughout the city that we're observing everywhere and everyone at a lot of intersections. You can get approval to, like, if I said, hey, Metro, I give you permission to log into my cameras inside of my house, you can sign those rights away from to Metro. But clearly I would do that if it's like, hey, there's someone in my house. I give you guys permission to go inside, right? There's still a lengthy thing with that. But and they would never violate anyone's rights. Metro wouldn't. So for businesses, like 7-Elevens, we were trying to encourage them to get us access to their cameras so we can solve the crime or to pick up where the bad guy left off, or at least get into there so we can have safety as far as like going in there if we had to do like like an action or an assault on a business to get a bad guy. But yeah, it's very those camera systems, they zoom into, like, man, they can tell the time on your watch. So when you have these people that are let's say card counters or whatever, I mean, those surveillance guys are like wizards with what they do. And then gaming control, yeah, you have the gaming control board would get called out on those, and they're the ones who'd actually make the arrest and the report. But yeah, going back to the security part, man, those guys, they understand how to document that. And some of them write just as good as a cop or even better. Some of them write better reports than I work with some guys at the Win, and I was like, man, you should test for Metro, or you should, instead of just being this like, report taker security guy, some very, very knowledgeable, great people that work there.
What's it like to work in Las Vegas for the Super Bowl weekend? Kind of like with us, it would be New Year's Eve in Times Square, but that's like a 12-hour day. The Super Bowl, everybody goes to Las Vegas to bet and party. I'm sure you guys make a ton of overtime. It's probably all hands on deck.
It is. Actually, there are two really big events is New Year's, right? Where we have like 400,000 plus people come to Vegas, all hands on deck, really, unless you have like FMLA or some kind of day off of like, for some reason, whatever you're off for. Usually it's some kind of emergency thing, but everybody knows you're going in uniform.
Right.
Even specialized units go in uniform. So
Right.
everyone gets on this trip. So, and then calls for service. Then everyone's working calls for service. And they have something called an AB roster where everybody goes 12 hours on, 12 hours off for usually 48 hours. Sometimes it's extended depending on what the weekend is or what day it falls on, or if there's other issues that they may see that they need everybody working. So Super Bowls, so we did have a Super Bowl a couple of years ago. If you ever see like an Allegiant Stadium is where they had it, is like when we knew we were going to get the Raiders, they did a lot of research on what does it take besides the exterior, what does it take to man an Allegiant Stadium or a football game and that many people and whatever. And so we were like, Metro can't do it alone. So what they ended up doing was initially was like segmenting out the Allegiant Stadium and saying, okay, Henderson police, you're here, school police, you're here, Boulder City. I mean, they really needed everyone to work together because we just didn't have enough cops for to man one of those. And still, I was just at Allegiant Stadium for the Paul McCartney concert Saturday, and you still saw multi jurisdictions working together. And yeah, the overtime here is crazy. I mean, we have some cops. There's I call them my top five that make 250,000 a year because they just work all of this overtime, like insane overtime, and there's just plenty of it. There's just traffic control for races. I mean, we have Formula One coming up. Like,
Oh, that's
imagine
right.
all of that, right? That's in the next couple weeks. They're already setting up on the strip, and the amount manpower that takes is incredible. I mean, you could literally work every day here and easily make 200,000 just on the overtime if you choose to. I mean, you're also risking burning out and
Oh yeah, losing your
all that
mind.
stuff. Yeah, and the jail has minimum staffing, so those guys get a ton of overtime as well.
I couldn't work in the jail, and I saw. I think wasn't your jail featured on a couple of TV shows? And I watched it, and I was like, wow, this is more of a pain in the ass than Bronx Central booking.
Well, see, that's the beauty of my life is like I only know what I know, and I don't know what Bronx, but and I can imagine like so I think our jail runs magnificently because that's all I know, right? So
Well, but most of the clientele coming through Bronx Central booking lives in the Bronx. They know what to
uh
expect. Your jail, it's people get locked up from all over the country, the world. They don't know what to expect, and they don't know
yeah.
the next step, and they don't have family that's going to drive 15 minutes from the other end of the Bronx to bail them out.
Yeah, yeah, I could see, there's a lot of bail bonds places surrounding the jail, like,
Oh my God,
because
those
they
scumbags.
clearly need to get bailed out, the jail has changed a lot since I was on the department because it moved, for one. They ended up moving, and we ended up getting our, like, own big, really, like, I think a beautiful building, so, the Sallyport and all that stuff has changed over the years and, just different way that they just do things. And clearly when you work prostitution, we're bringing like, anywhere between, I mean, on the low end, 8 in a night, 36 girls, right? And so that booking process can be a little lengthy, but they've really over the years have gone really efficient with it, making sure that you're not bringing stuff into the jail. I mean,
Yeah,
there's
yeah.
like 3 screenings before you can bring in. And if you get to like even the first screening, and they're like they find something on them, it's still the cop's job to make sure that that shit doesn't get into the jail. I know that there's just the whole medical process. That's the only thing that's kind of probably a big hiccup for some. The cops would probably complain about here is like their screening. It's like okay, like we would bring in a trans prostitute or a prostitute that was identifying as a woman, right? So they're injecting hormones. And sometimes if you don't take care of that injection site, it ends up getting infected and whatever,
Right.
And so there was a time where I brought in a trans prostitute and big gash hole, like almost this infection caused a hole in his thigh, and I was like, the jail's not going to take him. They're totally going to reject
Right.
him. And he's going to have to go to the medical. We're going to have to take him all the way to UMC and then bring him back. And no, they accepted him. But then there would be like another one where it was like, yeah, his blood pressure is too high. So you got to take
Yeah.
him. And I'm like, oh my God, this guy's got an open wound, like, so
Yeah.
you just never knew, until you got there and dealt with the nurse. But, yeah, but everything else just seemed, I mean, just constantly changing and really trying to improve and trying to make, and jail's not supposed to be fun, if they're like, "Oh, county, they,
Yeah.
F those people." It's like, you
Yeah.
went to jail, bro. What do you expect it to be like the Wynn Hotel? Like, it's not going to be that way, You can probably make some really cool friends, I guess, when you get out. And that's the other thing. It's downtown, right? So when they get released and they got their bag of stuff, in the plastic bag, and they're waking up to whatever, sobering up, and then now they get released, and now you got to figure out where to go. Your phone died, you may have some money or not, and now you got to find your way back to your hotel or your house or
Motel.
whatever, motel. I mean, you can walk right out there and probably buy some dope if you to get back on that wagon if you
I'm
want.
sure they do. Was there an organized crime presence in Vegas when you were active?
No, you know what? It's kind of funny because we used to joke a lot. We're like, "Oh, the mob was still here, really, truly running." I'm not saying they're not here because they are here. They're just not as overt
Active,
as
right.
they used to, right? And especially when you have Caesars Entertainment and you have MGM Properties, like those are big businesses, so it's not like Casino, which is one of my favorite movies, by the way. And when we would joke, like, man, if the mob still ran it, we wouldn't have pimps and prostitutes acting like they do in these casinos, getting into fights with the tricks and thinking they own the place. Like, man, if the mob was, we would say that, man, if the mob was still here, the pimps wouldn't be acting a fool like this. So there is a little bit of missing, missing them in a way.
Are there a lot of do the gangbangers from Los Angeles pose a problem?
Huge, yeah. So back in the I teach this in I teach a part of the prostitution subculture where you have the African American pimp and his prostitutes, and they have certain rules and regulations and policies, if you want to call it, where they live that lifestyle. You remember the ones with like the gaiters and the hats and the suits and like with the feather and the Jerry curl? Yeah, like old school, like pimp. Like it reminds me of another show I used to watch that was based in New York, and it was all these pimps, and they would sit there in their Cadillacs and like
HBO. HBO had a thing
yeah.
in the late '80s, and that was Hunts Point in the Bronx.
Oh yeah. Well, that I was like, that was beautifully done. Actually, the terminology and all that stuff was like on point. I was like, oh my gosh, this is really how it goes. And people like Fillmore Slim and those kind of like old school pimps. Well, in the '90s, you had this shift where these gangbangers like Bloods, Crips, all those guys would look at these pimps and go, man, he's not getting caught up. He's not catching cases. He's living this lifestyle, got all this money, got these girls just throwing money at him. He's never going to jail. Here I am slinging dope, robbing people, gang banging, risking my life, like all this stuff. I'm going to start pimping. I mean, maybe not in that's my language, but
Right,
in
right,
their
right, right.
language, right? They decided to convert. And so what we saw was a real big uptick of true gangsters. And generally, they could most likely they're felons. They've caught cases in the past and they're gang related, they're identified gang members, start selling girls and pandering or sex trafficking females. So you started to see like this uptick in gang violence on the strip, but they're fighting each other like this is a gang turf, and so you got a blood and a crip uh pimp, they ain't gonna get along, right? Like if you had the respectable pimping game, it's like your pimp acknowledges the other pimp's game, right? But you can't do that here in Vegas. You can't claim territory and be like, my girl's gonna be from this casino to this casino, or she's gonna walk from this light pole to this light pole, right? Like they do in other cities. And you can't do that here. You can't claim territory. Plus, why fight about it, man? There's plenty of supply and demand, and but it happens, and then we get shootings on the strip and gangsters fighting, and because for whatever reason, maybe not just because the gang tie and the opposing gang, but it could be also a territorial thing as well, and you just can't do that here in Vegas. And it's just too much demand for prostitution. So it's just like, let your girls go and work. And, but they still come with that. Now they have money, flashy lifestyle. They want to go show it off on the strip and whatever. And then you just end up having problems.
Are there a lot of biker gangs in Vegas?
There are a few biker gangs. Yeah. You got the Vagos are very big out here. The HAs aren't so big. They used to have I'm not 100% if they're still really that noticeable or prevalent, but we had a Hells Angels clubhouse here at one point. But Vagos are really the ones who you'll see a lot of out here. And then we have like, Laughlin River Run. You got, where it's a lot of bikers go to, and you'll see that. And you'll see like they may have some kind of events out here and whatever, but it's highly monitored by Metro, their crime, their whatever they're doing, and depending on who's involved in whatever. But you have a whole biker gang section on this department that's separate from the gangsters, like the black
Right, right.
gangsters, Hispanic gangsters. So it's actually separate, that little that investigations of those particular guys.
Oh, how has the legalization of marijuana in fact impacted the Las Vegas Police Department?
Well, I think it probably ultimately saves us a little time in like enforcing it, right? So if you had a little joint that was a misdemeanor, you can get a ticket for it. If it's more than an ounce, then you're going to have bigger problems. At this point, it may have just really cleared us up a little bit. It's not like, I mean, it's just like not using your blinker at this point, as far as like severity of a crime because they're legal and there's so many around the strip, the dispensaries. I mean, you can get weed anywhere. I mean, I think at this point you can get it to your house, like DoorDash. You could DoorDash marijuana at your house. So don't quote me on DoorDash, but I
No, no,
know
I get
people
it.
have had people have had it delivered to their house. So I mean, it's not and it's just not that big felony crime, that they have. I'm sure there's still issues if you have a grow, but here, if you had, medical marijuana at one point, you could have 7 plants, and that's like a lot. That's quite a bit of plants in your
Yeah.
house, and then it was only 7 per person per household. So it's like if you had 3 people living there, you can have 21 plants in your house. So it's
How do
not
you
really
enforce
not
that?
anything.
Right.
Yeah, but so when they made it legal under the premise that that money would go back to the schools and fund things in Las Vegas. And I mean, nobody I know and anyone around me says, "Oh, I got a new backpack from the weed money,"
Right, right,
or
right.
or the teachers got a raise because of the weed money because it's still federally illegal at this point.
Yeah, well, that's what I was gonna ask you because it's federally illegal, but now it's legal recreational Las Vegas, but the cops can't are the cops allowed to use it?
No,
I was
no,
gonna
it's just
say, how
like
can that
yeah.
like, I didn't know how that worked.
Yeah. So this is what I tell everybody because I get that question a lot. They're like, "Oh, now that it's legal, can the cops
Yeah, I
do
didn't think it
it?"
would be.
Yeah, it's like any business. If I ran a business, I'm like, "Hey, you can't have weed." I test for marijuana in my business. I could run a Dairy Queen and say I don't want anybody who tests positive for. I don't know if a lot of
Yeah, I don't wanna
high
test it yeah, I don't want anybody to test positive for sprinkles, right.
Yeah, yeah. So you just don't, it's any kind of business or whatever. But think about like that being high. Let's say, it's just like alcohol.
Yeah,
Let's say you partied the night before and you're like, oh man, I got to go to work at 5 in the morning as a cop.
right,
And are you drunk still at work? Right.
right.
And so are you still high coming to work? And then, I can tell you, I wouldn't want somebody high handling a gun or going to rough situations, and stuff like that. So that's where I think great. I think some things like CBD for pain and stuff like that, I think they still don't allow that. But I think, if maybe they were educated or they had more science backing that should be allowed, in my opinion, CBD, but that's also still not allowed. So
Yeah, it's
anything
a
that
gray
comes from
area.
marijuana. Yeah. So
How many years did you have in with the Las Vegas Police Department before you gravitated towards the Vice unit?
oh my gosh. Well, I was still on probation.
Wow.
And I was sitting in a Lone Star with my boss and who's my sergeant at the time, and I was like, I'm really interested in Vice and like working undercover, and I think that'd be cool. And he's like, oh, I know somebody. And then like it was the next week, I went and did an operation with them and to test it out, see how it was, and I just like loved it. And I wasn't even eligible to test, and they just kind of like oversaw that. Maybe they didn't see it, maybe they did. I don't know, but I ended up in the unit and I ended up staying there about 3.5 years until I moved to a different unit that does covert and plainclothes operations.
So what was your first assignment in Vice?
So I went up there and I was assigned to enforcement on it's kind of like a grave swing ish kind of hours. And so you're on the squad with all I had was other guys on my squad. So it's me, a bunch of other detectives, and then my sergeant. So every day it was like we decide what we're going to do. If we're going to put me out as the working prostitute, or am I going to support the male detectives to pick up prostitutes? So I every day was like different, and it was like sometimes it wasn't even planned. Sometimes we planned the week out, sometimes we didn't, because again, the demand here is so big and the supply is so prevalent. Like we could decide to hit one casino and get 20 prostitutes. And then, there's like 50 other casinos that are operating, under that, with girls coming in and out. So how I kind of explain a prostitution in Vegas is like, it's kind of like an ant hill, right? Where the ants are coming out and they're all working, you know, and doing their thing. And vice is like this, just killing one ant at a time, right? Like taking out one ant at a time. And that's kind of what you have to do in Vegas. And what that did was keep the fear of arrest, keep the fear of, getting in trouble or getting caught up or whatever in check. So it was eventually you look at it, and you're like, man, this is just a big game I'm playing. Because there were girls that we would arrest. Like there was one girl, I remember her so well. And it was part of the game to get arrested. 9 times out of 10, they didn't resist because they knew, oh, okay, I went to jail. You caught me. I
Right.
trespassed out of this casino. Here I go again. Or you guys got me again. And it's like, shucks, you got me again. And there was a girl that we got 3 times within we got her two in one week in a 4 day, because we only work 4 days, 4 10s. Then the next week we got her again. And I just remember her going like that. And I'm like, and then it's like, come on, well, let's go. And she's just gradually, like casually walking with you because they just knew that that's just how the game works. And which is then, if you look at it in the very like, a compassionate side, is like she's getting caught up on all these cases. She's gonna have to go to court. She's probably getting a lawyer and all this stuff. And then there's the pimp just living his life like nothing, right? I mean, he's gonna get pissed. He's gonna get pissed at her for being stupid, for getting caught up again, or not doing, or trying to figure out how to not do it again. He's gonna get pissed that she's out, a day's worth of money at minimum, depending on how long she stays there, and then the other money that she has to pay out for the lawyer and all
Yeah.
that other stuff. So in any given day, we can just be like, hey, let's just go hit streets, and then we'll find a hotel. What hotel have we hit in a while? And then we just go. And it was nice when I went back up there as a sergeant. Is like, hey, if this hotel's dead, let's go hit another one. And we would go hotel to hotel to hotel. We could hit a couple in a night and get plenty of arrests. And what's nice about the strip was, um, they're uh, they're so protective of the strip, because you ruin our tourism, you're going to ruin
Right.
our city, right? So I mean, they constantly have like wagons, so it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
hey, I got 5 prostitutes at Cosmo. Can you come and pick them up? And they just go, and they're so used to us. And had all their paperwork done and all that good stuff, and inventoried their bag for them. So the process went a lot easier. And you just load them up, and they're on their way to jail. So, I mean, that's how, like, just, I don't know. It just seems like it's a very, I mean, there's prostitutes everywhere, but it's seedy infested, because some of these girls, just, I was on the strip last night, and I saw this beautiful girl go from guy to guy to guy, and I'm like, my friend was like, I don't think she's a prostitute. And I'm like, watch her mannerisms. She's not drinking any alcohol. She's just standing around waiting to be talked to. She talked to 5 different dudes back and forth. He's like, well, why didn't she go with this guy, that guy, that guy? He said price wasn't probably right, because some of these girls, I'll be honest, like, I would never consider prostituting. But the draw of a square girl, like, let's say a school teacher out of LA says, I'm going to go to Vegas because I need, a couple $1,000, and my friend says you can do that in Vegas. And it's few and far between that you'll get a girl from another jurisdiction, like even, New York, fly here, for a couple $100 ticket, and leave Vegas with a weekend with 10 grand. I mean, it's not impossible to do. And the going rate here, especially on the strip, and if you're halfway decent, you could make, anywhere between 1,000 to 10,000 in a night, finding the right guy, right? You got to find the right guy. And that's why I was like, no, she's looking for that mark that has the stuff that, has enough money, or has the stuff that she can take later.
You had a funny story I saw in another podcast about when you first started that you didn't know what the going rate was for a working girl.
Yeah, that was just the craziest thing, because I was like, there's no, like, I really thought I was set up, and I really thought, and they took care of me, and I loved it. But, that was my, I take responsibility for some of that, because I was like, oh, maybe I just, I didn't know how much the going rate was. I wasn't one of those kids that were on the strip all the time. I was like, a Disney kid. I didn't watch crazy movies. I did watch Casino, but and some other movies that were, I don't know, like Pretty Woman. I just thought everything was like Pretty Woman,
Oh
right?
man.
And I'm thinking like, because if you think about it, I just watched it again a couple days ago because I was like, oh, it's kind of nostalgic. And I thought about her and like how much she made. And that was New York, right? Wasn't she in New York, like on the track in
I,
New York
I
somewhere?
think so. Yeah.
Yeah, and like she made for the week made like 20 or 30 grand. Like, and I'm like thinking, okay, she was a streetwalker.
So what? How did it go down?
So is they were really good. I go up there as my first time. They just say, "Hey, wear something, kind of skimpy and whatever. You're going to be at Garces and the Boulevard." And I said, "Okay, I kind of know where that's at. I'm not too sure." And so they're in the on this white wall. They're just explaining how everything looks and how it's going to go down and what the signals are and distress signals and stuff like that. And I'm just like, "Okay, I get it. Walk from A to B." And then they said, okay, soliciting prostitution is a crime of conversation. It's a sexual act for a fee. Okay, that can't be that hard. And then, they said, well, they're going to ask for anything under the sun. They could ask for sex. They can ask for a blowjob. They could ask for, I want to pee on you. And I'm like, wow, okay, so I'm not doing these things. So I'm
Right.
very
Right.
assured, like,
Right.
okay. But it doesn't matter as long as there's a sexual act for a fee. And they said they can charge you, they can ask to pay for anything. And I was like, okay, cool. So, I mean, I should have asked, but I didn't. So, but I just thought, okay, great. I get it. I get it. And in my mind, because it's my first one, right? I'm thinking, okay, I got this, I got that, I got signals, I got this, I got this guy over here, and whatever. So we get out there, and first time I get out there, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, okay, sexual act for a fee. And this guy just gets out of the car and he leans against the car and he nods at me, and that's universal sign for,
Yeah.
hey, I want to talk to you, or hey, what's up? So I walk over and I'm like, hey, how are you doing? And he's like, good. And I said, I'm good. What are you looking for? And he said, I'm looking for sex. And I was just like, okay, dang, they really forgot to tell me what the going rate was in this area. And this was like 2001, right? And inflation, economy tanks, and all that stuff. I'm thinking, okay, $100. And he's like, 100. And I was like, 10? And he's like, 10? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, okay. And I think he kind of had a little like, I don't know, because I had all my teeth. At the time I was 24. I didn't I was dressed okay. I mean, I was young, so maybe he was just like, this girl's really naive. And I was like, yep, I'm really naive because I really don't know. And so I was like, okay. And then I get back to my sergeant and I was like, motherfuckers didn't tell me how much to charge. And I'm sitting here like, what is the going rate? Because I don't want to be undersold. I don't want to be, overpriced. Because, if it's like extravagant, like they're going to walk away if they think it's too much, especially if you're looking for a prostitute down. And that's really downtown is where I was working. I mean, later I find out by working more is like some girls would charge for freaking Happy Meal. They would charge for $10, just enough to get them their next rock or whatever, right? It's not the casino prices because those girls can charge anywhere from the low end of 300 back in 2002 to 1,000. Now they're up to like, 5,000. There's a girl we ran on at the Venetian, and I was like just curious, and I'm working undercover with a male detective, and we're pretending we're a couple. And I asked this girl, and she's beautiful, beautiful Asian girl, like just. I mean, this is one of the nicer casinos, and we're talking to her, and we're like, "Do you do couples?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I was like, I'm really curious, like what's the most you ever made off one trick? And this is working. I'm undercover, so I'm just asking her, and she's just just telling all these stories. And she goes, well, there was one day I met this guy and he gave me $10,000. She's like, it was still wrapped up in the paper that from the casino cage. It was crisp, and she's describing it like so vividly. So that's why I was like, I really think she's telling me the truth. And so I was like, well, what'd you have to do for that? And she goes, well, I didn't have to have sex with him, in that sense. And I'm like, okay, well, like, what did you do? Like, what crazy thing is worth $10,000? She said, I had to wear a strap on and I had to anally penetrate him. And I'm like, that's it? I'm thinking that's it for 10
Well,
grand.
that's
I was just telling my friend that. I was like, I just told him this story a couple days ago and I was like, I don't know, man. That seems like that was a good, I mean, a good deal for her, right?
I guess. You
But
you got you got a funny story that's like Elaine from Seinfeld where the guy just took it out?
yes, yes, yeah, that was on that same block, which is funny because you know where Pawn Stars is, or Pawn. You've heard of Pawn Stars,
Oh,
and Pawn
yeah.
Stars wasn't the big place that it was before. It wasn't like at the time. It wasn't always like glam. They
Right.
had this dirt parking lot next door, and then next door to that was this Showgirls, which was an adult video bookstore and peep show, and we had been out there for a little while, and you know, it did have some foot traffic going back and forth because you'd have people going from downtown to the boulevard. And I got put out there, and right when I hit the corner, this tall black guy comes up to me, and he's just like this tall guy. He's got a backpack. Doesn't look like, you know, really honestly, I was like, he's not a customer. He's just either homeless or vagrant, you know, whatever. And so he just walks up and he goes, "Do you want to see something?" And I was like, "Sure." And then he just pulls his dick out and then starts flapping it around. And I back up and I'm like, "Oh my God." So he starts like walking towards me,
Oh,
and so I
man.
turn around and I start like not in a sprint because I mean, there's really, I don't have to go that far before my guys come out and, you know, take him into custody because, you know, they see all this and they're like, what the hell? And so they get out. I'm running like, like a girl. Like I really girled up on this because this guy is just like, and he's following me around. And I'm like running. I'm like, oh my God. And so my guys come out, they take him into custody, and they're like, "Why did you do that? Like, what was the point of it?" He's like, "I just wanted to make her laugh." And I was like, "Well, you accomplished that, but I mean, how many other times does that guy do that?"
Yeah, I don't think that was his debut.
Yeah, I don't think that was his first time thinking, you know, I'm gonna make this prostitute laugh, you know?
Well, speaking of bizarre guys, did you ever arrest a guy or deal with a guy that afterwards you said to yourself, "This guy is dangerous"? Like, you thought that given the opportunity, he would hurt or kill a prostitute, like, that's actually why he was out there. Like, you got a real bad vibe.
There was an incident where I wouldn't say like he would hurt me per se, but there was a time where I had this is one of the first time I was in Vice, and I was like, I really started considering I need to get out of here for a minute because this call is really not good. So I had a new boss at the time, John, and so he released me out to this area called Five Points, and it's where like the Fremont Street, Charleston, Boulder Highway, it all meets there. And there's this parking lot and it's by Lowe's. So there's like this weird, like I said, Five Points where all these streets meet, and there's like this curve into the road. And it was the first one of the night. I get out and I'm walking, and this one truck drives by me, and we make eye contact. And I'm like, okay, I got a possible. If he pulls over, I'll approach that car. And then another car drives by, and it was like one of those like wagons, like a Magnum wagon, like it's kind of like a Charger, but it had like the wagon. It
Okay.
reminds me of the old Bel Airs, but brand new, right? So I look and I see this guy, and he's got a white beard, older guy, and dark tinted windows. And I make eye contact with him. I'm like, okay, I got another one, you know. And some of these guys drive around because they're like waiting to get the balls to pull over and actually make the conversation. So the truck goes by again, and I'm like, okay, the second one, second pass, and then this car comes by again, and then he parks this Magnum kind of wagon parks down the street, and so I walk up to the passenger side because now that window's down, and I see there's this girl in the passenger seat, and the guy is driving. He's got the beard. He kind of looks like a fit Santa, is what I kept referring to him as. He looks like a fit Santa. He was like good looking guy with a beard. But then this girl in the car, she looks young, but I'm not sure really how old she is. And her outfit didn't match. She had like a striped bikini top, a plaid skirt, which I'm like, this kid's or this person is old enough to
Yeah.
match their clothes, you know? So I'm thinking he picked her up further up on Boulder Highway because that's
Yeah.
where a lot of our seedier girls are. And so I was like, what's up? You know, and I'm thinking in my mind, I'm like, okay, I got to figure this out because this is just weird. I've never had a guy with a prostitute in the car.
Yeah.
I said, oh, is she working? He goes, no, she's not working. And he kind of just like joked, kind of like, oh, that's so silly of a question I would ask. And I'm like, well, what are you looking for? And he goes, well, do you like her? And I was like, yeah, she's cute. Did you pick her up before? He's like, no, she's not a worker. And I'm like, okay. And I'm like, what the f is going on with this? So he says, would you like to see her? And I'm like, yeah, I guess. Like, I'm thinking this is a deal we're doing, or maybe this is threesome or something. He's got some kink or whatever. So he lifts up her skirt and she's not wearing any underwear. He's like, oh, do you like that? I'm like, sure. Oh, and I don't care. I'm an undercover cop. I'm just looking for the crime of conversation. And so I'm like, okay, well, what are you looking for? And he goes, well, I would like you to, and I'm going to use graphic language, but I want you to perform cunnilingus and I'll watch and then we'll have sex. And I was like, okay. I was like, and she doesn't work? And he's like, no, she doesn't work. And I was like, okay. And I said, well, that's going to cost you a little more money. And he said, well, how much? And I said, $80. Because again, I didn't give a shit. I just didn't know what was going on. And I thought I had a victim of something. Either
Yeah,
she was a
yeah,
prostitute or
absolutely.
whatever, right? Like, I don't know. I don't even care. He could have said $4 and I'd have been like,
You want him to
great.
go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, "Whatever," and so he goes, "Hey, do you think you can get us a rock?" I'm like, I'm not gonna charge that. I know a guy that can get you that." I said, "You're gonna have to pay for that on yourself," and he's like, "Okay, well, I wanna smoke while we do this." I was like, okay. And so I'm like, I'm really just like dumbfounded, confused about this
Yeah.
whole thing because I'm like, who is this girl? This is kind of crazy. And so I'm like, okay, cool. We end up taking him into custody, and that was her dad. And this girl was 15 years old, and this was a common thing that they would do. And it wasn't, she's not like a full willing participant. It's her dad. She doesn't know any better. She just does whatever dad tells her. And so we get him in custody and we get them separated. And I was like, fuck this shit. I am
Oh,
taking this
yeah.
on as my own case, right? So I start interviewing her and she's telling me, yeah, I've been molested since I was as long as I can remember. I'm since I was at least 5. My mom knows that my dad molests me, but my mom made him sign a contract that he would stop doing it, and she holds that contract in her locker at her work. And so my mom thinks he's not doing it anymore. My dad keeps threatening my mom because she was from Mexico that she would threaten to have her mom deported if she didn't do these things with him, right? And she goes, and then I have an older half sister she was like 30 something. She goes, she sends my dad lingerie pictures of herself. Still like, I love him, I love you, I miss you, blah, blah, blah. And that's her older half sister. So we started doing more of an investigation, talking to the mom and all this stuff. And he ended up being arrested for child molestation in
Yeah.
Florida for that first kid, the daughter that he had, right? So, but they dropped the case because the kid didn't cooperate. So then he
Oh,
moves to Vegas,
right.
marries this illegal, and I was like, they're not going to deport her. At the time they weren't going to deport her. That's bullshit. They were legally married, and so he ends up marrying the mom, has a boy. Well, that's not his thing, is boys. So he has another kid, which then ends up being this little girl. And then they've been doing that a lot. And so I said, well, like, who else have you picked up here? Do you know their names? Do you know the locations of where you guys have done this before? And she's like, well, normally it's this black prostitute named Thunder. We go there and I have to have sex with her and him, and we all three have sex. My dad and this other prostitute will smoke rock, and that's just what we do, like every couple weeks. And I'm like, this piece of shit, right?
Oh,
So
yeah.
I booked him for every possible thing that I could. Just in the conversation, that
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
like 2-minute conversation, I'm like 2 counts of soliciting, child abuse. Like, I'm booking everything under the sun. Then we call up sexual assault because I'm like, I can't sexual assault. They're gonna have to do like a bunch of other stuff to
Yeah,
get
yeah.
back to
Enhance it.
5 years, when she was 5, when she can remember. And then with the mom and putting that back, trying to figure out, is she culpable because she knew it happened, never called the police, and that kind
Get
of
a
stuff.
warrant for that locker.
Yeah, everything. Like, I mean, evidence, like her outfit, he picked out her outfit. That's why it didn't match. That's why it was like, to me, tacky. But told her not to wear underwear, like everything, right? And I'm like, this fucking guy, right? Like,
Yeah.
that was the case that I was just like, dude, I gotta go do something else for a minute because that was
Wow.
so just gross and so sad. And this girl was she was like, you would think a kid would be like, you got, really attached to her dad. didn't want, piss him off and whatever, and just went with the flow, didn't know any better. But she was so kind and so sweet. And like, I was like, this girl still has a light. And what really, really pissed me off, because you got to get mad, right? You got to get mad at some of
I
these
would.
people. Right. Like, and I want him to go away for a million years. And we end up going to court, and I have to testify the same story, but clearly more proper for testifying. I'm saying eating out, and I have to explain those terms and stuff. And he, when he rolled into the court, he looked like he probably lost like 30 or 40 pounds. He was in a
Good.
wheelchair, sickly, right? And so I was talking to the kid outside, and she said, "Well, my dad says he's got cancer and that's why he's losing all this weight." I'm like, "Your fucking dad don't have cancer. He's losing weight because he's going to prison this time instead of the whole Florida debacle not happening, right? Is he's going to prison because he literally confessed to me he's molesting his kid uh to an undercover prostitute. Like,
He knows
fuck
he's done.
you, you're done. Yeah, you're done. Don't be telling people. One of the worst, even to top it off, like when we got into the elevator and we're going down, and that son was there, and that son in front of me, in front of the mom and the daughter, was like, "You fucking ruined our lives. Dad's gonna go to prison. We're not gonna have any money." And I was like, this fucking kid.
He's brainwashed.
Yeah, brainwash doesn't have, I mean, love your sister, man. Maybe he didn't know. Maybe he didn't know the extent of what was going on. Maybe dad's downplaying it, just like he's saying he's got cancer and losing weight. So he ended up getting quite a bit of time.
How much?
uh, I
Do you
I
remember?
want to say 40 years.
Oh, good.
Yeah,
Good.
but it was just
Good
sad,
job.
man. Yeah, that was one of the ones where literally, like, I left there and I didn't sleep well that day, and it was a very long day. We were with her. I turned her into Child Protective Services because we couldn't let her go back home
No.
to a mom that doesn't clearly like
Yeah, have
make
a
really good
problem with it. Yeah.
decisions. Yeah, and so, when I was like following this case to a T, but that was the one when I was a detective where I was like, "Man, I gotta get out of here and go do something else because this is not right?" And I remember that kid. I remember where we were. I remember, like, I could see her outfit in my mind so vividly, and just like it just really crappy. She was like, "But I didn't do the drugs," and I was like, "Baby girl, like, it's
Yeah.
not that. It
Right.
wasn't that. It was just you're a victim, and I'm sorry, that happened to you."
As you can see, I'm a Las Vegas Raiders fan, but I've been a Raiders fan when they were in Oakland. I'm going to be 60. I've been a Raiders fan for 50 something years, and they break my heart.
Yeah, you haven't been to a game here yet?
No,
Oh my god.
I've been to Vegas twice. That was more than enough for me. Just like one time we went a week and I says, this is
Oh,
much too
that's a
long to
long
be.
time.
Yeah. Second time there about 4 or 5 days, but it's like, I don't know. I just Vegas rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah.
It's not what I thought. You're kind of that strip is like you're corralled and you know what I mean? Being a cop, I just with the crowds and everything. I mean, I moved
Yeah.
down to Florida. I grew up in the Bronx. I did 20 years with the NYPD. I'm done with crowds. After Vice, you started moving up in the world in your undercover work, and I saw you purchase narcotics and firearms and did a couple of joint investigations. Can you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so once that bad case happened where I was like, "Okay, I gotta start
Yeah.
testing for somewhere else," I ended up, going down the hall to special investigations section, which did plainclothes and covert ops, and they actually are part of the department that does liquor and gaming and other regulated and, privileged licenses. So, you can go into a bar and nightclub, pool clubs, and all that stuff. So I work undercover for those and really just looking about integrity of the businesses and things like that and make sure they're operating effectively. And I would join with narcs because being a female and not very many of us can do
Right.
undercover work. So narcs would use me all the time. And then I eventually ended up in criminal intel and ended up, because I could work by myself. I wasn't like just a pretty face on a UC's arm or whatever, right? Like I could ultimately go into somewhere and cultivate my own targets. I could relationship with people to figure out what was good, bad, ugly, whatever. So I ended up getting called to go to criminal intel, and that's where I ended up working a lot of different task force and a lot of FBI, and then ATF. I worked with them a little bit too. Like, it was a lot of different things. A lot of times I'd be with an informant and then introduced to the bad guy, and then you can easily get the informant out once you build the
Right.
trust with the bad guy, right? So I would do that. Bought couple pounds of meth. One guy I was buying fairly consistently with. And I was like, you know what? I really want to try to buy a gun because I still had this persona because you got to go with what you know. Because,
Right.
if I try to bullshit you and say, like I'm a nail tech, right? I better know a lot about nail teching because if you ask me some question and I don't know it, you can get called, your story's a little, you don't even
Right.
know about this, you don't know about that, whatever. So I kind of went with the prostitute side because I know a lot about prostitution. So there was a point where I was buying drugs, and he's a felon, and we're like, okay, he has the potential, and it's always a no unless you ask. I was like, hey, I work as a prostitute, and that's not what I said exactly,
No, I
but
know.
I work.
Right.
I am a working prostitute, So I was like, hey, I get hit up on all the time by these pimps. Some of them are getting really violent. And he was like, oh, I get that. And I was like, can I get a gun? And he was like, yeah, let me work on it. And we end up meeting. And this guy, I don't know if he's that stupid or I'm that good. One of the two, right? Is like he ends up meeting us in front of a casino. And we talked about all these cameras and everything. Man, they got cameras from every corner of the casino, even in the parking lot. And he's like, I'll meet you at this casino. And I was like, great. And we meet in valet. And he just hands me this bag and he's like, the gun's in the bag. So I open up the bag and I'm like, oh my gosh, okay, cool. And I was like, thank God he kind of did that because I was like, now I don't have, I can avoid touching it. You put in my
Right.
prints on whatever. So I was like, well, this guy's like, he's got to put it in something, right? So I was like, oh, okay. I was like, wow. And we're just walking. He's counting the money out in the middle of this ballet. And I'm just like, what a dingus. This guy really, either he really trusts me or he's really stupid or, I mean,
what
desperate,
what did he
stupid.
sell you? What kind of gun?
Actually, I don't even remember, but it was a little, I think it was like a little SIG, like a small gun. I think maybe because he thought because I'm a girl, I probably
Right.
need something that's concealable or whatever.
Concealable.
But yeah, it was just a little SIG. I'm more familiar. All my guns are Glocks, and I have one little SIG, but it was if I can recall it, it was like a little SIG, like a P232 or something, very a smaller gun. And so I just like, and I remember leaving the parking lot in my undercover car. And the first thing I did was call my ATF friend. And I was like, guess what? I bought a gun. I bought a gun. Like I
Oh
was
yeah.
so excited by myself, not with the assistance of a guy, another UC, not having someone else talk for me. Like I really w- had the conversation myself. It was solely me. And I was so excited. Like, I mean, that's to me in the undercover world, even when I talk to these ATF guys and they're like, oh, guns are like better than dope, like to buy because
Yeah.
that's like the next, like if you can do that, you're doing great, especially because he's a felon. And then turns out when they ran the gun came back to a square that was almost like a front to buy guns because he had no criminal background and then sell it to these shitheads. And then he still felt comfortable enough to give it to me. Oh, and it turns out he was actually like a middleman because he got dropped off and they parked at the very corner of this casino parking lot. And he got out, walked up, and then came to me to the valet. So I was like, oh, where's the guys that you got this from? And he's like, oh, they're in the car. He said, we're just going to leave them. And I'm like, okay, cool. So I have to make a decision. Do I go say hi and start that? Or do I go, okay, let's just hope,
Break
the
off.
surveillance team got him and got where he's at, got plates, got, maybe they do a car stop later or very later. So
Right.
I
Right.
did.
Right.
I ended up leaving in my car, calling my ATF buddy, and I'm like, oh my God, I got a gun. Like, I'm so excited. And he's like, good job. He's a little,
That's
like, he's
cool.
my big brother. So, and then, they continue on that case. And then what's, what's bad is, so I told you about, I worked in the section where they regulate business licenses. So a year and a half before, I had given that same guy a ticket for no business license. And this whole time I was buying dope from him, this time I bought a gun from him. And we go back to the office, and it was probably like a day or two later. My handler, the detective on the case, he goes, do you remember this guy? And I was like, no. He goes, you gave that guy a no business license ticket a year ago. And I was like, what the frick? And he's like, you're done buying from that guy because
What if?
Yeah, what if he, like, all of a sudden has some fucking flashback
You
and
say
he remembers you
something,
were
or all of a sudden it
yeah,
dawns on
an
him. He
outfit
probably
or
liked
some
you because there was some kind of familiarity he couldn't put his finger on, but he wasn't suspicious.
We ain't gonna try that, we're not gonna test it." He was like, "You're done." Like, I was like, "Wow, you guys probably should have looked that up before." Like,
I can't
because
even
it's in his
imagine.
criminal record, right, that he had a citation, and then they could pull that citation up and see my name was on it. So that was kind of a little sketch.
But what I wanted to ask you about, I forgot about this. Were you working the night of the 2017 Mandalay Bay shooting?
I was. Actually, I was the vice sergeant at the time, and we were doing a search warrant at some John's house, John's apartment, and he had just robbed a prostitute, and we got him back to the his apartment and arrested him, and then we were doing a search warrant to look for the knife and all that stuff. And when we did the search warrant, we have a marked unit standing by, and just to make sure, because we're all in plain clothes, right? And so we have him standing by, and all of a sudden it just starts that incident starts, and we are listening to the radio from the patrol guy's vehicle, and you just heard pop 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 and yelling and screaming, and we're like, oh my god, let's wrap this
Yeah,
wrap this
we
up.
got to get down there.
Yeah, find the knife, let's go. And so Matchco was another sergeant that was with me at my search warrant. He's like, Jen, do you care if I go? And I was like, no, fucking go. Like, we're
Go.
gonna wrap up his search. We're gonna go highly identifiable because we're in plain clothes. And I believed in being highly identifiable when we're gonna go into something like that, right? Vice is, yeah, we do undercover stuff, but be prepared. I always told my guys, have something yellow jacket that says police on the
Right.
back, like all this stuff, because we don't want to get blue on blue, right? Get
Right.
shot by our own. So I remember being in that parking lot, and I put on my green BDUs, I put on my yellow jacket, I put the vest on, and I was like, let's go. And so we drove right to the CP, and finally everything calmed down in the sense of the shooting stopped. And but now we need to go because we thought multiple shooters,
Right.
and so now we need to disperse. So here's my squad of vice guys, beards, and I remember I had a female on my squad, and she was wearing Toms, which are pretty much, like slipper shoes and stuff. And we're like, just don on whatever your stuff, get your equipment, let's consolidate in a car. And we ended up getting dispersed to the Paris Hotel, and to really clear that out. And we still had people running, and we had people saying there's multiple shootings still going on. And later on, like not that, like maybe minutes later, we'd figure out it was like a pole had not been knocked down, and said somebody assumed that was more gunfire. And you had people wearing no shoes, had been running from
Yeah.
that area, who were now in front of the Paris or trying to get back to their room. They ended up wanting to bolt lock all of the doors so you couldn't get into Paris, because they were fearful that there was multiple shooters, right? Just walking down the strip shooting, because that's the stuff that was coming out.
Oh yeah, it gets clatter in that shit. Like one person hears a rumor and they go with it.
Yeah, they're just running, going, "There's a shooter, there's a shooter." So then everyone starts running. And yeah, it was just a really crazy, that whole week was crazy. That day, we were doing a search warrant, but it turned into us really securing the outside eventually of the valleys. We secured the Paris hotel, and then we got back in our car, and we went back to the CP, and then got dispersed back to in front of valleys to just really, like, make sure nothing else was going on, and that they could stabilize the scene. And that, I remember going home, it was daylight at that point, and probably, I don't know, six, no, I had to be like 7 or 8 in the morning. We end up checking back out and leaving, and then going to take a nap at home for a little bit, and then coming back out. And then we were in specialized units. Most of them ended up coming back out in full uniform and being assigned somewhere.
I'm sure that was a crazy night for you guys.
Yeah. Yeah, it was crazy in the sense that, like, I mean, Metro is so great about training. Like, we train for everything, every situation. Like, active shooters, like, we have some of the best training, I think, because I do train a lot of people around the country, and they're always asking about how we do stuff and whatever, and how I see other jurisdictions not as diligent and not as resourceful as our department is. Man, but this is the thing about that shooting, it came from above. Like, that was something really that wasn't we really ever trained, that we had this 360, you know,
Yeah.
like, where a shooting can come from. Like, we just didn't anticipate that part. You didn't know where it was coming from. Active shooters, you see over across the country now, are like walking into churches and shooting, and they're walking into other venues, just shooting at, normally at our level. This guy had a huge advantage.
I know Lake Mead is covered by Clark County Sheriff's Office, but have you heard anything about this with the amount of stolen vehicles and bodies that's been coming up since the waters receded there?
Yeah, there's a lot of bodies in the barrel, and then we can go back to the mob because some of these bodies that are coming up have like 1970s, 1980s wardrobe. Like they can document that they were, had shoes and clothing that were made or designed, or a logo or a brand or whatever that was from 70s, 80s. Yeah, and they're just some of them are floating up, some barrels are becoming exposed because the water levels are going down. And I'll tell you though that Lake Mead, you do get a lot of people who go out there to commit suicide as well. And you do have some drownings because it's very remote. Like Lake Mead and that river is very like there's a lot of land out there where you could easily, commit suicide and you're gonna end up being, coyote, meat or whatever, but you might get found. It just,
I,
takes
s- I s-
time.
I saw that. And I was like, they were pulling up these drums, like you said, from the 1970s that the
Yep.
mob was using to dispose of people. So I
Yep.
want to touch upon Covert Blue LLC, your organization. Could you go into what it is, when's your first class, and how it works, and how people can get in touch with you and sign up for it?
Yeah, so I created Covert Blue LLC. It's a training program, and what I have in store currently up and that's able to be registered for is my first women's only women's undercover and investigations training, and it's going to be in February, the end of February, the 23rd through 27th. It's open to women only, and of all ranks, of all positions in law enforcement, or if you're a DA or an investigator, and those who really want to learn about vice, narcotics operations, undercover operations, those who are interested in just doing basic or plain clothes operations. And so I created that because of that whole, one of them was like being prepared to work, right? Because that's not the typical scenario. And then it happens with guys too. But the typical scenario of a girl being recruited to work undercover is, hey, you look really cute. Would you like to do vice operations? And would you like to dress up as a prostitute? And we're going to throw you out on the street. And really ill prepared. And they're not prepared to do the operations. They don't know what they're doing. And there's a lot of jurisdictions that that's a typical story that I get. And it's not just the women, the men also. It's like, hey, I want to try Vice. And then they're like, okay, baptism by fire,
Yeah.
trial and error. And they don't get the training that they need. And so I developed the women's school, and I'm determined to make it one of the largest that's ever been held, and only solely trained by other women who have done the job. And I have a great lineup of women that, man, like they were idols to me growing up in the undercover world. And those relationships that I built has created this school. And I'm so excited for that to happen. I also teach a slew of other things, and I can teach co-ed. I can teach men how to pick up a prostitute. I can teach under. I know people are like, "How'd you do that?" Because that's what I had to do, right? Because that's
Right.
one of the things in Vice that I was really like, I'm not going to be a one trick pony. You put me out there and get pimps and Johns, like I want to pick up prostitutes on my own, and be able to do a guy's job just as much as the girl. He can't get out there and put a skirt on and get Johns. Though I did do that one time when I was a sergeant. I dressed up one of my officers as a trans prostitute, and he got 3 arrests, and I was very proud of him because that was quite a bit at the time. I love Joe for that, but and being a good sport and all that good stuff. But I mean, they're out there working as well, and they really need to understand how the operations work safety wise, how to stay alive during these things, the risk analysis for those things. So I teach a slew of training. If you go to www.covertbluellc.com, you'll be able to see I'm available for any of the trainings that I listed. I can come to your jurisdiction and I can train the training at your jurisdiction, so wherever it is. So the first women's school is going to be in Las Vegas, but I will travel if
And
you
when
want
is
that.
the first? When is the one of the first classes?
The first classes I currently have trained is the women's undercover in training, and that'll be February 23rd. So that's women's only, trained by women instructors. So it's going to be great.
And it's www.covertbluellc.com.
Yeah.
Org or com?
.com.
.com.
Yeah.
Jennifer Benjamins, I want to thank you so much for spending your time with us today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And you can follow me on Instagram as well on Covert Blue LLC. You'll be able to see this podcast on there and get directions on where to see it and other reels and other training things that I'll be putting out later.
And thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
And as always, I want to thank everyone for tuning in, especially my listeners in Ocoee, Florida, Moonachie, New Jersey, Nashville, Tennessee, Chestnut Hill, Massachusetts, and Prince Frederick, Maryland. If you work in law enforcement or had an interesting criminal background, please drop me a note on Twitter or Instagram at VicFerrari50. If you're watching on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe button. If you enjoy the content, check out my Amazon author page. Type in my name, Vic, Ferrari like the car, where you can preview all of my NYPD books for free. Thanks again, everyone. I'll see you next week.